If I take one more step, it'll be farthest away from home I've ever been.
Walt, this is the supermarket. This is as far as you've ever been?
More so spiritually, this is the furthest I've ever been.
You feel spiritually connected at IGA. And that's actually impressive. I feel like my soul is evaporating through my socks when I'm here.
I get that sometimes. Then I remind myself that the purpose of this shop is to perpetuate hedonism and an unending pursuit of excess, culminating in a sleight of hand trick where we become so embedded in crony capitalism that we can no longer adequately observe the world around us. Then I take a deep breath, and I find solace in the notion that all paths are of my own choosing, and I can choose a path free from obligation to material possessions.
Oh, yeah. I hadn't really thought about it like that. I guess the blindfold of this societal normality has made me complacent in the, oh, look, it's a bunch of chocolate bunnies.
Let's get some! Yay! I love chocolate! More!
Oh, Lord, we have now hit, pinnacle all the references possible.
Everything is done.
We referenced Lord of the Rings in the last skit as well.
We did.
And you've managed to bring it in.
I don't know how. Look, it just comes.
You're
sometimes.
really excited for that set.
I really am. I really, really am. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast by the Greensboro Commander community. It's the GCP by the GCC and POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast. We're all uniting forces to help you to have better games of Commander. I'm your host, Walt.
And hello, Commander players. I'm your other host, James. Now, we know how our podcast works by now. We're about to receive a transmission. We can see the light blinking in front of us. But before we jump into the episode, I did just want to remind everyone that if you're really enjoying our content and you want to support what the Get Commanded podcast is doing, the best way that you can do so is now on our Patreon. It's an incredible list of things that you can receive, including games with me and Walt, which is really exciting, on our Discord. But also the opportunity to receive some Discord privileges and all this kind of stuff. We're looking at doing some more eventually on this, but you can go to patreon.com/getcommandedpodcast and sign up and support what we're doing.
Yep, it's really the absolute best way to support the content that we make. So if you've been listening for a while, you enjoy the stuff that we do, even just the bottom tier of Patreon is supporting us a lot. So if you do it, we'll really appreciate it. And if you don't, that's also fine, but come on.
Yeah, just listen and tell your friends about us and play more Commander.
Yeah, Commander is good.
That's what we actually want you to do.
I mean, actually.
Yeah.
Speaking of, we do have an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
The path to victory is perilous and fraught with distraction. It is crucial that you understand what stands between you and victory, and the myriad steps you can take to progress down the path.
Hey, this is a revisit.
It is a little bit, isn't it?
We're going back to our actual very core roots here.
The episode 1, I believe, was how to bring the game to an end or something like that. It's been a while.
You won't be able to find it because I mean it was our very first episode. We had some audio issues, but
you can find it if you do a lot of digging. I'm not telling you where to look because I don't want you to listen to it. But yes, it's a throwback.
I'm actually keen to revisit this topic because I think that, as a Commander player that enjoys the experience and the story that you create while playing the game, I often get distracted with playing the game of Commander and being like, oh, that's a threat, I'm going to remove that, or oh, I could do this funny thing, I'm going to do this funny thing. So I think that this episode is going to make me a better Commander player, put me on the right track to actually winning the goddamn game for once.
I mean, it's interesting. They did say, the emphasis in the command seems to be victory, but it said the path to victory specifically. So I imagine that will be slightly different from that first episode we did, in that it is about winning the game, like that's the goal here, but it's also about how we get there. So that's probably what our focus is going to be. This is something I've been thinking about a bit recently, actually. I was thinking about, I think maybe it was a conversation with you. Someone asked me, like, roughly how many games of Commander do you think you win? Because, I think I mentioned that you should win about 25% on average. And I think when I go to the game store, I probably win close to 50% of the games that I play.
As one of your key and main opponents? Yeah. Yes, you do.
I win a lot of the time. And look, I've often looked at my decks and gone like, am I misrepresenting them in Rule Zero? Am I a pub stomper and all this kind of stuff? And people have repeatedly assured me, no, that is not what's happening here. I think it's mostly just experience playing the game, and I think it's this one particular focus that I've had in my head since probably 2021, when I started watching basically friend of the podcast at this point, Sam Black.
Yeah, we've actually got a poster of Sam Black up in where we record now.
It looms over us.
We pray to him before we start recording.
Thank you, Sam Black, for the game of Magic.
Blessed be upon my drawers.
Anyway, look, I enjoy watching Sam Black stream a lot. He's a very, very good Magic player. And one thing I noticed that he was doing that I kind of realized was lacking in my games was he kind of seemed to be able to navigate his way to a win when I was kind of looking at a bunch of other stuff on the board. Like, he sort of knew what was preventing him from winning and how he would get there. And it just seemed like he had this instinct that would get him over the line in games where I was like, oh my god, if I was in this game, I literally would concede at this point because I thought it was so losable. And a couple of the other players we play with who are really, really good are similarly very, very good at this, I would say.
I would say that it's probably the key thing of what separates like a Commander player to a good Commander player. They know what the board needs to look like, and even what their hand or graveyard needs to look like in some situations.
Yeah.
They can really envision what they need to get to before they pull the trigger and activate that win con card or activate what their win looks like. And recently, I know we talked about this in a Planeswalk a couple of episodes ago.
Yep.
Been playing a lot of chess recently.
Yeah.
And I've noticed as I've got better at chess, I've noticed that I can't just chase checks. Like, putting the king in check is a great way to, like, force your opponent to do something. But to get a checkmate, you actually have to do a bit of setup before you activate that checkmate. And I've noticed as I become a better chess player, I've seen, right, no, if I check him here, I'm not going to actually win because it's not going to close the game out. I need to set up these pieces before I slide that queen forward and get the checkmate.
Yeah, well, this is basically exactly what the Space Commanders want us to look at, I think. And look, I think this singular focus is probably the one thing that will make you win more games of Commander than any other. And I know that sounds really spiky, but actually I think everyone being engaged in the process of trying to win actually results in better Commander games. And I want to give a few examples.
Yeah.
So I think when we all agree to the fact that we're trying to win and that is expressly our goal, and yeah, like the journey along the way is a lot of fun, and that's a focus of this podcast a lot of the time.
Have better Commander games not only by winning, but enjoying them.
Yes.
We recently discussed burnout and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so yeah.
definitely.
This is not a spiky focus.
No, it's not a spiky focus, but it's always good to keep in the back of your mind, because when you do, it prevents a lot of things that occur in Commander games that we sort of typically almost just like 90% of us don't like to see.
Yeah,
so,
I can think of a couple of things
already.
already.
So cards that make the game needlessly long, for instance. So Chaos decks do this. Stacks does this, except in CDH probably.
Yeah.
Land destruction when it's not a win con. Like, these tend to basically reset the entire game. And really, if you ask the question like, how are you trying to win? Someone who's doing this would kind of go like, I'm not sure, or like, it's kind of funny, this kind of thing. And it's like, well, actually, if your main focus was winning the game, you would have a specific out in this scenario, right? You'd have a way of winning, or you probably wouldn't play these cards because you're just making the game really long without a win con in sight.
I think there's some kind of like enjoyment that people that do play these cards get out of Chaos, and they enjoy. I'm looking specifically at Chaos here, because I think Chaos is like it's funny to see how the game works when your hands are off and it just kind of happens.
Yeah.
But you got to consider, you can do that by goldfishing at home if you'd like. I think that there is a strong consideration that there are probably 3 other people that are sat there trying to win the game, or at least trying to enjoy the game at the very least.
Or in some cases, just trying to play their decks.
Yes, exactly. Because maybe they've got a brand new deck, they've just sat down, they want to pilot, but Possibility Storm is now out, and it's like, okay, now I don't know what my deck is doing.
No, and I don't know how to get out of this. Yeah, definitely. I think similarly, I don't see this very often, but I have heard stories. There are cards that explicitly make you draw the game, and it's very possible to navigate your cards in a particular way where this can happen.
Well, there's some certain combos that you can get off that are infinite and unbreakable loops.
Yes, so you literally, the game, by the way, there is a magic rule here, which I think is what you're referring to, which is that the game actually has to draw.
Yeah, if you've got a combo that's going off like infinite flickers, but you don't have a way to stop that infinite flicker, but it's not going to actually end the game, like there's no enter the battlefield, deal damage, like an impact tremors or something.
Yeah, there's not a win on site for you.
The game's rules say, all right, draw. Move on.
I mean, you literally can't finish resolving the stack, so it makes sense. Like, there's no way to navigate out of it unless you can end the loop. Yeah. And by the way, if you can end the loop in that scenario, you have to. I believe that's also a rule.
And you have to determine how many times you go through the loop.
Yeah.
I've seen it at, like, proper sanctioned events where judges have had to come over and say, right, I can see the loop here. Can I see players' hands and graveyards and all this kind of stuff to understand, is there a way to stop this loop?
Right, yeah.
If there isn't, you need to determine what happens, or if you can stop it. If you can't, it is a draw, move on.
Yeah. So I think this is a thing where, like, obviously in that situation, often people are stumbling into that draw, but...
Whoops, I went infinite.
Yeah. But there are cards in Magic, they're very old, that explicitly say the game ends in a draw. There's not very many of them, and you don't see them very often. But again, if our main focus when we're playing Commander... at least in terms of, like, mechanically within the game, is I need to win, you would not play those cards.
No,
right?
Well, they're actively saying this card, if you resolve it, doesn't let you win.
Yeah.
So forget the draw bit.
Yeah.
You don't win.
You don't win. And
imagine casting a card that says you lose the game.
Well, that's seriously how I think you should think about it. And likewise, I think we see similar things. We obviously talked a bit about king making before. A few episodes back. I forget which episode it was exactly. But basically, this is if I'm describing the mental... thought that someone who is king making has, I think it's something like, I can't win, so I want you to lose.
I will choose who does win.
Yes. Yeah. And basically our way of reasoning through king making, I think, was we suggested that you should really, really consider if there's not some way you could win. Because if there's any way you could potentially win, 100% you should go down that avenue, right? Yeah. It doesn't make any sense to leave behind the possibility that you could win the game.
Yeah, I've been playing, like I said in a couple of episodes ago, a lot of mono red on standard at the moment.
Oh, yeah.
And Theo has now got a bit of a catchphrase that I've been using apparently when I play, and it's the phrase, "There's a world where I still win this." So I don't concede. My mono red list is surprisingly resilient. And I have found myself saying, there is a world in which I still win this, so I'm not going to concede. And in a one-on-one match, that is actually king-making. So I think I'm carrying this same mentality over to Commander from that, being like, nope, I still have a chance here. Yeah. I'm not going to concede, and I'm not going to make you win either. So I'm going to do everything I can to stop you from winning and make me win.
I think that's just good sportsmanship, definitely. Sure. In a similar vein, we do sometimes see spite plays, which is kind of similar to king making, but this is more explicitly like, I'm angry at you, so I don't care about winning at all anymore. Like, this is literally not even like, oh, I don't think I can win. This is just straight up like, I'm leaving behind the concept of winning in favor of, like, targeting your board. I've seen this a couple of times in games recently. I typically will get to the end of a game and say to someone,
why did you do that?
Why did you do that?
That wasn't a good play.
There was absolutely no need to do that. But again, if our main focus, I hope this is the main thing you're taking away here. If we're all thinking in our heads, like, yes, we love the game of Commander, we love hanging out together, we love every aspect of it, but my goal is to win, we can leave behind a lot of these strategies that are not going to get us the win.
Exactly. I think that there's a really interesting parallel that I'm going to draw with this mind state in mind, which is paralleling it to CDH. You kind of referred to it a second ago, but when you sit down at a CDH table, the rule zero conversation is generally, we're playing CDH. let's begin. Because everyone's in the exact same agreement of, I am going to do everything I can to make myself win.
Yep.
That includes, not doing things like spite plays. Because there's no reason for me to do that, because this is as competitive as I can.
Yep.
And if I pull a spite play, it actually impacts my path to victory. If I use that card incorrectly, the chances of winning goes down a bit.
Yeah.
And I've found that this mind state with CEDH players often is perceived, and we talked about this in our What CEDH Isn't episode, it's often perceived as a really spiky, super competitive, everyone's sweating, they're dabbing their brow of sweat to try and get through the game.
Yep.
My experience with it is exactly the opposite. Because everyone has this agreed upon decision that no, we're going to try and win, everyone's actually a lot calmer and a lot more, in my opinion, respectful and a lot more understanding of plays. Yeah. I've been in CDH games where someone's counterspelled something of mine and I've not been able to respond to it, and it gets countered and it's really detrimental to my game plan. I'm like, oh, well, this really puts me out of the game. And then my opponent that counterspelled me went, oh, sorry. And I'm immediately like, no, don't apologize. No. That was, if I resolved that, I would have either won or you would have lost. It's one of those two options. So it was in your best interest to counterspell.
Yeah.
And I, myself, I'm like, okay, well, they felt sorry. I don't feel bad at all because I knew it was the right thing to do. It's a different mindset. And I think we actually said that in the CDH episode. Yeah. We said it was a metagame and a mindset. And I think that the mindset of CEDH, of being in agreement to what you're trying to do at the table of Commander, is a good thing to take over even into casual Commander.
Yeah, I think you might be right, actually. I totally agree with you. And you get really interesting conversations sometimes in a CEDH game where someone will do something and actually, someone might say something like, oh, what's your reasoning there? And it's not like an angry thing. It's just like
can I understand your line?
Yeah.
What's your line here?
And 90% of the time, someone will go like, oh, I thought that them resolving this would prevent me from doing this, which is really integral to my game plan. And then most of the time in CDH, because we're all in agreement of that same thing, someone will go like, oh, that makes sense to me.
Yep.
Yeah, that's fair.
I also love it when someone does something and the question is asked of, oh, why did you do that? What's your line? And then the person that, countered the spell or destroyed the enchantment, whatever, goes, oh, actually, really good point. I have no idea. And then they learn something and they go, that actually wasn't detrimental to me at all.
No.
And it was stopping you two from winning. So I should have left it there.
Yeah. It's a good learning opportunity.
It's a good learning opportunity,
sure.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of competitive Magic, I'd like to get sort of into the thick of the episode now, which is that path to victory. So what does your victory actually look like is the question I want to ask here. And the parallel I'd like to make to competitive Magic is something you hear a lot when you watch streamers and that kind of thing. And we've talked about it before, which is, what are your outs? Is a question that you'll hear a lot of the time.
We discussed this in the language episode of
Commander. We did. So this is specifically asking you, okay, I'm in this difficult situation because of the board state or because of the spells or the cards in my opponent's hand. What is my way out of this situation? And usually, what is my way to the victory from here? So in the deck building template, we recommended 3 to 5 win con cards. So they're going to be one way of getting your way to that victory for sure. But the path to victory is going to be about navigating to a board state where the win is possible. So this is going to be a lot of these questions like, what are your outs? How do I get out of this? What cards can I draw? This is kind of the questions you're going to ask yourself of okay, I've got to know my deck pretty well here so I can find this way through this murky situation.
And this is what I would actually encourage the listeners to go back and listen to some of the deck building template around the win con and the enhancers section, because it gives really good context into the type of cards we're talking about here. And as a bonus, when you've put it in Moxfield and you've tagged it as a win con card, your brain then associates the win con with that card and you think about it in that way.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a mental thing, but I even have when I think about, what are my outs here? I need a removal spell. My brain looks, the Sherlock Holmes goes into his mind palace, goes through his Moxfield list.
The Moxfield Mind Palace. I love that, actually.
I want to see some competitive streamers that go into their Mind Palace.
Oh my god.
That'd be great.
Incredible. Yeah.
It helps you kind of understand what your deck is equipped with.
Yes.
To deal with the problem and get you to your win.
I think a lot of this section is going to be about knowing your deck list really well.
Yeah.
Basically, if you can goldfish ahead of when you start playing your deck in games, that's going to be really helpful. But also just play your decks a lot and learn them really well.
Yeah.
Because you're going to learn stuff stuff like the fact that your win con cards, like let's say you're going really wide. That's the way you build your deck. You've made tokens or whatever.
So any of your decks.
80% of them. You can't cast Crater Hoof Behemoth because you don't have the money, in my case. You can't cast Crater Hoof Behemoth or Overwhelming Stampede or a Chroma's Will to win unless you have a certain number of creatures first, right?
Exactly, yeah. I 100% agree with you. A Overwhelming Stampede with 2 1/1s on field.
That's not a win.
Pumps your 2 1/1s by 1. And
it's a waste of that card,
that's
really.
5 mana that you've basically thrown in the toilet. Yeah. Like, it's terrible.
So it's worse than casting Giant Growth twice, and that is saying something.
Mutagenic Growth can be cast with your life. Do that instead. Like, do that.
Oh, yes, absolutely. But, in a similar vein, like if you're playing a graveyard deck, you'll have win con cards like Rise of the Dark Realms, Command the Dreadhorde, Living Death, this kind of thing. You can't use those cards to win unless there's a certain number of creatures in your graveyard.
Yeah.
So a good part of the middle of the game is going to be navigating to the spot where those cards let you win.
Well, I'll give you a really good example for graveyard decks. I actually played a game with you, Stubbsy, which, by the way, after appearing on our podcast, has decided to play again.
He's back
just for a little bit.
Just a little,
This is great.
It was good fun.
Yeah, it was really enjoyable. And Stubbsy and Theo. So that was the pod. It was me, Theo, Stubbsy, and Walt. I was playing my Scarab God deck, so obviously my win con is like, I do have a Rise of the Dark Realms as a win con in there, so I was trying to mill everyone out, but none of my opponents had creatures heavy as represented in their decks. So I then was like, oh, damn it, how do I get to my victory if I can't get creatures out of my opponent's decks? Right, I need to shift my focus in milling myself because I have creatures.
Sure.
And that was like my redirect of my path doesn't look like that anymore. I need to refocus it and make sure that where I'm going is actually leading me to a victory.
Yeah.
And it was milling myself. And that, like, changing the way I thought about it was really helpful. I don't think I won that game. I think I missed it, but I drew tons of lands. That was right.
You did. You drew nothing but lands for about flooded. 10 turns in a row. Yeah. But no, that's true. I think that's almost the next step, I would say, which is that you know not only your deck and how your deck wins, but also had the foresight to spot the fact that, oh, okay, my typical sort of win con of stealing my opponent's creatures isn't going to work at this pod, so I've got to shift it a little bit. That's definitely exactly what we're talking about, which is knowing your deck, knowing what your outs are.
And that helps when you know your play group really well. If you're playing with randoms and new people, that it becomes much more skill. It requires a lot more skill to be like, oh, they're running this commander and have played these cards already. I can kind of already guess the deck lists.
Yeah.
It's a bit different when you don't know the play group.
No, and I think you can definitely get most of the way here just by knowing your own deck and knowing how your own deck will work, and then you can navigate your way through from there, definitely. Just to name off a couple other examples of this sort of, like the win con and then the way to get to the win con. Rampaging Baloths in your landfall deck, you need to get a certain number of landfall triggers before you get over the line. Comet Storm is a common win when you're casting big spells. You need a certain number of copies of that spell, or you need, your X cost into that burn spell needs to be very high. If you're playing a Spell Slinger deck, Talran, Metallurgic Summonings, Deka, all of these require a lot of spells be cast before you have the bodies to win. So in our words, what I'm trying to get at here is that most of the game, in fact, you could argue the entire of the game of Commander, is finding the win. Once you've found the win, you've won. The game is over, right?
Yeah, true. I think that it's one of these things where if you're... I find that I understand what my win con looks like when I goldfish my deck on Moxfield without anyone interacting with it.
Sure.
I don't pretend that someone would have removed this, someone would have removed that. I goldfish my deck and try and really think I need this on field first before I cast this to get the best effect. And once you've played that through a couple of times, you really start to identify what the board looks like before you go, okay, I reckon that's a win.
Yeah.
In your goldfish experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that's what a lot of this is going to be about, is asking yourself those questions. Okay, what does my win actually look like? And during your turns, actually ask yourself questions, especially at the beginning before you've cast any spells. Okay, are there any cards that would let me win on the spot? Like, if you do have that super wide board, maybe now is the time when you should be digging for Overwhelming Stampede. Because it's like, that card literally wins you the game on the spot, potentially, assuming there's no interaction. So, like, looking for that card and spending your turn drawing cards is actually probably the correct thing to do, because you've kind of got everything else you need.
Yeah, in the exact same vein, if you're running like an aristocrats list, and you've got a bunch of tokens on the board and they're ready to die, and you've got the sacrifice outlet, you're like, okay, now I need to find a blood artist to actually have the payoff of doing these things. So like, and maybe you've got one blood artist down, but you quickly do some maths in your head and go, okay, now if I get a
Falconwrath Noble,
or another aristocrats effect, I'm gonna get there twice as quickly. It's like, it's running it's I know it sounds spiky, but it's running the numbers in your head to find, okay, this is what my board looks like right now. What is my win from here?
Yeah, and this is also what's going to let you know when you might need to draw cards and when you might need to tutor. I know we said that we generally don't play a lot of tutors, so mostly for us this looks like card draw.
But if you are playing
tutors, you should know what you need at any given time.
Yeah, I think with tutors specifically, I found this with a couple of my opponents, is when they cast a tutor, they're looking through their deck as if they have no idea what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll ask them, are you tutoring and casting something? Are you passing the turn from here? What's happening? And they're like, oh, I have no idea. And I'm like, you just cast a demonic tutor, best tutor in the game, to find something.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think that if you are running tutors, you need to know what you're tutoring for. Otherwise, your game is just going to be all over the place. And can lead to things like spite plays. For example, in a situation that I'm specifically thinking of right now, actually, someone did cast Demonic Tutor and was like thinking about what to get as they were tutoring and flicking through the deck, and they ended up saying pretty much exactly this of, I could get this, which will help me win, or I could do this and get payback. And I'm like, whoa. Why?
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? You could get payback by winning the game. Like, you could win, or you could just make someone's life at the table miserable. And it was actually really on the nose. They ended up tutoring an Aura Curse, which I just thought was like that's the most spiteful plays ever.
We know which of those two choices you picked. Hey, I could win, or I could curse you.
I could actually get my revenge.
Play a curse on your body. I don't know who that was. It was a friend of mine.
Don't let them come back.
I haven't seen in a long time. Don't curse your...
Especially like players. That. Don't use that voice when you're cursing an opponent.
I'll go ahead and say, if you are going to curse me, do it like that. I'll enjoy that a lot more if someone says to me, "What? I have cursed you and your family for the next 10 generations."
You know I run Curse of Opulence in my decks.
And you always curse me.
Yes, damn straight.
Oh, next time you do it, I want to see that voice.
Curse of Opulence on Walter!
Oh, we've truly lost it now. Yes, no, totally. And I think that's a waste of a demonic tutor as well. You've got the best tutor in the game. You can find literally the best card in your deck.
And you did something that actively slows another player down.
Yeah.
I don't want to hark on about it too much, but it was a situation where that player was close to a win.
Yeah.
And a card like Overwhelming Stampede would have helped them get there.
Well, this is the kind of situation where it's like I know we said before about like needlessly prolonging the game. We mentioned like stacks and chaos and stuff, but actually making choices like that is needlessly prolonging the game, because you could just win instead.
Yeah, I also think that like when you're referring to like, using these cards to dig or, go through your deck or tutor, finding cards in specific situations where there is a problem on the board state that's stopping you from winning, knowing that, and like I referred to it earlier, when I look at my list of tagged removal spells in my mind of what's going to get me out of this spot, and it's not going to get me to my win immediately, but I need to get rid of that thing, whether it's a ghostly prison or a Talia or something like that. I need to get rid of that thing so I can get to my win.
Well, funnily enough, that is your path to victory, right? If your win con, whatever it might be, is not possible on the current board, then whatever is stopping you, whatever permanent that is, maybe it's a ghostly prison, that is your path to victory, is getting rid of that thing.
I'm weirdly now picturing us on like a D&D adventure in a caravan, like a, horse and carriage thing, and there's a tree in the middle of the road, and you're like, a saw. And like, we'll cut down the tree. If you like really contextualize, like that is blocking you from your path.
Yeah.
You need to cut down that tree that's in the middle of the road and get rid of it so you can get your carriage through.
Absolutely.
To get to the win.
And look, like digging with your card drawer is going to be an important thing that you might need to do to get there. But I think it's also worth considering, and I see some people missing this, actually think of the exact cards that get you out of it. And if you can, this is like next level stuff, think about what their casting cost is. Because I see people do this sometimes where they start like, I've seen people cracking bloods, for instance, right? So this is you pay 1, tap it, sacrifice the blood, discard a card to draw a card. So this is literally just through the deck.
You got that rules text exactly right.
I play a lot of bloods, man. With bloods, like, you can effectively pay 1 and trade any card for the next card in your library, right? You're discarding 1 to draw 1, discard 1 to draw 1. But I've seen people do this and use all of their red mana, for instance.
Whoops.
And their wrath that they're looking for, their blasphemous act, is a red mana value spell.
Yeah.
And they actually draw it. And then it's like, oh, I can't cast this because all I have is black mana, or all I have is white mana or something. And it's like, yeah, you actually need to, as you're digging, actually really think like, okay, I'm looking for Blasphemous Act. Look at the board. Like, how much mana do I need to cast this Blasphemous Act? Because that's reduced by how many creatures are on the board. So if you've got 8 creatures, you're like, okay, cool, I can cast this for a single red, but I have to have a single red.
Leave that single red open.
So you can dig as much as you want to until you have 1 red, but you can't dig past there because then you can't cast Blasphemous Act anymore.
Yeah, I find it's this episode is doing a lot of throwbacks to other episodes. Like our episode on the Order is a really good one to return to in regards to this, in terms of, we spent a long time talking about tapping lands.
Yes.
But like in the same vein, when you've got like a spell like Mind Spring, right? You'd want to draw a bunch of cards for an X value cost.
Yes.
Think about, what's the card that I'm looking for here? How much mana would I need to feasibly leave open after declaring a value for X to then cast that card?
Yeah.
My Zaxara deck has this issue all the time.
Right.
I have a lot of X spell draw effects. And I now know that list pretty well. I'm like, okay, there are like 3 different cards that can get me out of this. Both have an X cost in them, but I need to declare at least one of them as an X value for 3, so I need to leave 5 mana open so I can draw like 4 cards here.
Yeah.
So let me draw 4 cards and see if I get it. If not, I'll reassess then. And
This all sounds probably, if you're new to this kind of stuff, really, really complex. But like, you can get there. And it's just about prioritizing, just looking around at the board and going like, okay, what does my win look like? How do I get there? So, look, we've covered a lot of the stuff there. This is kind of the myriad steps you can take, as the Space Commanders said. So, what's the rest of the podcast about? Well, it's going to be about how you will need to trade resources and prioritize certain things to find your victory. So, remember, the path, as the Space Commander said, is fraught with distractions. So we will be coming back to that. But before that, we're going to have a little thrifty interlude.
Thrifty interlude.
So we've got lots left to cover, as we said, but we're going to have a little break to hear about a new thrifty card. James, do you want to give us the rundown of what this card is? And then I will do my usual dramatic monologue, dialogue, something. Weird shit is definitely right.
This is a really well-chosen card for this episode, because it's a saga, which is a chapter by chapter. You know what's coming. You know what the end result is.
You got to plan. Your path to victory's got to be very clear when you cast a saga card.
To be honest, this card definitely has been a part of my path to victories in a lot of different games.
Mine too, actually.
It's an incredible card. The card for the Thrifty Interlude this episode is the Mirari Conjecture. For 4 and a blue, you'll get a saga, which, if you're unfamiliar, as the saga enters after your draw step, you add a lore counter, and you sacrifice it after 3 lore counters. So the first lore counter will get you to Chapter 1, which says return target instant card from your graveyard to hand. Chapter 2 says return a target sorcery card from your graveyard to hand. And Chapter 3 says until end of turn, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy.
Do you ever feel that your time is finite and you just don't have enough of it? As if your waking life is one sustained blurred moment that could at any instant be proved false by the opening of your eyes? What if that was a good thing? Introducing repetition. What's that? You don't like making the same mistakes over and over again? You're clearly not failing well enough, so it's time to fail better. Imagine if Zeus's bolts returned to him after he'd thrown them so he could smite again. It's fun to be a god. Get budgeted.
Road to El Dorado! Oh my god, we've referenced everything on this podcast at this point.
It's true. That was an old one, to be fair. I wrote that quite some time ago. But yes, evidently I can't get my head out of quoting other things.
Very fitting for this episode, though.
Yes,
Very
and
good choice.
a great card, I think, for thinking about, your way through.
Well, that literally plans 3 turns, doesn't it?
It does. It says think 3 turns ahead. Yeah,
really
definitely
cool.
it does. Well, these are released every week in text form over on Discord, so you can check them out there. It's linked in the show notes. And you can also see me bring some of these to life as weird monologues and or dialogues over on TikTok at G_Commander Community. So check us a follow on there to see them as they come out.
Yeah, you just posted a weird one with one of my favourite plant elementals up there at the moment.
Phytotitan.
What a weird boy.
That was an a suitably strange monologue to be given to him.
Yeah, if you want to see Walt just be weirder and actually see his face while I get the privilege on the podcast of seeing your face when you perform. This is an opportunity for listeners to see it. So if you want to check it out, G_Commander Community.
Yeah, definitely check us out. Well, let's get back to the command the Space Commanders gave us, which was the path to victory. Specifically, I think we were going to look at the perilous nature of it and the fraught with distractions, which are the 2 things they said about it. So, what are we going to need to do to find our path to victory? Well, we need to understand the board and what is specifically blocking us from reaching our victory.
Yeah, specifically you as your game plan, your path to victory. It might be freaking another player out at the table, and it might cause them to be like, we have to remove it. We at the table. Often people start using that word to try and get other people to help them and bring in other resources to assist in the problem. But if you actually look at it, sometimes you're like, well, that's stopping you from winning, but it's not stopping me.
Yes.
So I don't care.
So there's a clear delineation here between things that stop you and things that are stopping people collectively at your table. So, if you're playing a graveyard deck and someone casts Rest in Peace, Walt will be screaming in the void somewhere. But most importantly, you've got to change your whole game plan to be, I must get rid of Rest in Peace, right? That's your new goal until Rest in Peace is gone. But if it is not the case that you absolutely must deal with it, and we'll outline quite a few scenarios in which you don't need to respond, even when people tell you that you should, you can ignore those things, and actually ignoring them is what's going to let you focus more on what your path to victory looks like.
Yeah, and I often find that these are really incredible windows when it's something that everyone else is scared of not affecting you to start politicking. The politicking aspect when these things, like these problematic things on the board come out and someone's freaking out and they're like, oh my god, I'm a graveyard deck, Rest in Peace is going to screw me forever, oh no, and you're like, well, I don't really care about my graveyard, but I do have a Naturalize in hand.
Right, and I could be a friend now with you, the graveyard player.
What can you give me if I got rid of this for you?
It's true. It's definitely a good opportunity. I would say, especially if you are that player who must deal with that threat. Like if you're the graveyard player and Rest in Peace has been resolved.
You're not winning the game if that stays on the field.
No, so yeah, unless you have a Feed the Swarm in hand, it might be time to start politicking with people and getting them to remove it. But equally, if you are that other player in the game and you don't need to get rid of Rest in Peace right now, you by all means, you can strike that deal, make that political friendship, but only do it if it benefits you. Like there should be something really tangible that player can offer you specifically before you even consider doing this.
I think I've set a bit of a weird precedent at my tables because I love politicking and I love getting deals out of people, especially when it's this kind of deal that is something really problematic for them. I can help them out with it. So I set some terms and conditions out, and usually what I do is make it really solid and everyone understands what the deal is. So like, I don't want you to swing any combat damage at me for 3 turns, and I will count for 3 turns how many turns I get, all this kind of stuff. Now, I'm saying this on the podcast again, so people know my secrets. Why do I do this? But usually what I've done is calculated in my brain how many turns I need to win.
Yep.
And I've gone, right, 3 turns with no combat damage, I should be able to pull a win out there. So me going, okay, I can get rid of this for you, spend 2 mana to cast my Naturalize, whatever. I know that if I don't take any combat damage from that, graveyard combat player, I should be fine to get my victory.
Sure.
So obviously I'm very aware of what I need to win. So this is another thing for the player that does need it removed. obviously the player making a deal with you is going, and we've said this on the podcast before, if you're making a deal, make it so you get more out of it than your opponent does. That is the key to politicking. I have seen a lot recently at my tables where people are like, oh, we're friends, right? Yeah, sure. Boom, pop, move on. Like, I'll get rid of this thing and we're both friends.
Sure.
Friends is not a good deal in Commander.
No.
That there is no guidelines to when you can break that deal, when you can stab each other in the back. Like, it's a bad thing to kind of set up. And I encourage you, if you're taking this episode as like, okay, I want to win more often, that's one thing you can stop doing to make your path to victory clearer.
Definitely. Completely agree with that. I think as a general rule, when someone offers you a deal, don't take the first terms that are outlined. At least try negotiating. If someone says like, oh, I'll remove that for you and you can have, don't swing me for 3 turns.
Yep.
Ask them, how about 2 turns? Because, you know, you might find your way to negotiating something. Maybe they'll say like, oh, no, 3 turns, but I won't touch anything on your board.
Yeah, ooh,
and
that's
suddenly
nicer.
that's a way sweeter deal than what you had before. So negotiate a little bit. It would be a definite.
I mean, that's just good
thing.
life advice. You know, you get a quote for a kitchen renovation. No, can you do any better?
Yeah,
like don't just take the first number.
No, that's totally fair.
Yeah.
However, I will say that a lot of these things, so definitely politics is totally a valid way out of these things. And if something is a real problem for you, by all means, politic. However, a lot of the things that you might think are going to be these real problem permanents for you are actually not that bad. And I want to outline a few circumstances in which you can probably ignore stuff that your opponents are doing. And this is, again, the fraught with distraction that the Space Commanders are trying to iterate with us.
And a lot of these cards are cards that you will freak out about because they've got a big money value behind them because they're really good cards, or they're just cards that generally read, I win the game if.
Yeah.
But for you, it might not be that case.
Yes, exactly. So, for instance, if one of your opponents has resolved Avenger of Zendikar, right?
Plant boy.
Yeah, you made 1 million plants. They're going to get bigger every time a land ETB is under that player's control. But let's say you have a ghostly prison. Until that ghostly prison is gone, the player who's playing Avenger of Zendikar is going to have a really hard time swinging into you.
Well, I mean, like, the difference between this and, like, a Ghalta, for example. Like, Ghalta can swing, and you can pay 2 mana to attack the player with the ghostly prison.
Yeah.
So Ghalta's a lot scarier for you if you're playing ghostly prison than Avenger of Zendikar.
Yes.
Because Avenger of Zendikar goes wide, and that's 2 for each creature that's attacking you.
Yeah, they might have to pay 10, 15 mana, 16 mana.
That's wasting their entire turn.
Yeah,
so
they're unlikely to do that until they can get rid of Ghostly Prison. So they're probably just going to swing at other players, which actually is good for you.
Especially good for you. They're killing your opponents.
Yes.
If a player is actively killing your opponents, leave them around. Just let them do their thing, then kill them later.
I'm reminded of the Napoleon quote, which is never interrupt your enemy when they are making a mistake.
Yes.
Yes, so Avenger of Zendikar, if you have a Ghostly Prison, not a worry. In a similar vein, a card that I play in a couple of my graveyard decks, Altar of the Brood.
Very strong mill card.
Very strong mill card. So this is whenever a permanent enters the battlefield under your control. It's a 1-mana artifact. Whenever a permanent enters the battlefield under your control, if you have the Altar of the Brood, each opponent mills 1. So if you are the kind of player who is trying to mill your opponents, especially if you're going to steal things out of their bin, it's a really, really, really good card to
100%.
get you that way. But if, let's say you're on the other side of the table, someone else has played Altar of the Brood, and you're a graveyard deck, don't remove Altar of the Brood.
That's like card draw for you on your opponent's board.
Exactly. That is absolutely not a problem. The amount of times I've seen people people have this really weird hang up about mill, where when they're forced to mill cards, they just have this like instant, I am so angry about this
These are
thing.
Resources that I could have used.
Yeah.
Rah, rah, rah.
And sometimes they're playing a graveyard deck, and I'm like,
It's basically card draw.
they're giving you ammunition.
I know. I actually find like if someone was to resolve an Altar of the Brood while I was playing my Scarab God deck,
Yeah, you'd be over the moon.
give him a kiss on the cheek and a good cuddle. I'd be like, thank you. I now no longer need a tutor mesmeric orb. I appreciate it.
Friendship over. I've got what I need. Yeah, exactly right. Similar vein, a card like Authority of the Consoles. This makes your creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, and you gain a life when they ETB. This is definitely annoying if you're playing like a token deck. If you're playing a Voltron deck, who cares?
Your creature is in the battlefield.
Yeah, you have to
good.
wait a turn and then you swing for 25. Like that's absolutely not a problem for you. So you can safely ignore that, and that's sort of the recurring theme here. You know, if someone resolves Storm King's Thunder and they're gonna cast some huge burn spell, and you've got hexproof,
you're fine.
You're fine.
Well, like, this is also a thing. I find that, like, we're talking a lot about permanence here, but, like, you just mentioned Storm King's Thunder is something on the stack. There are a lot of things that people that are new to playing counter spells that are very quick to counter a spell. When a spell is on the stack and you have a counter in hand, really think, if this spell resolves, what does the end result look like for me?
Yeah.
Not for the table, not for that player, because it might be really good for your opponent, but it might not affect you at all.
Yeah.
Have a strong think whether or not you actually want to counter something before it resolves, because sometimes, like I've seen before, like, if you can interrupt a huge spell on the stack, but it's not going to affect you, do you really want to do it? If someone's casting a huge burn spell, but you have maybe like Phyrexian Unlife on the field or something like that, you can't, or like something like you can't lose the game because of your life total being 0.
Oh yeah, Platinum Angel.
You could feasibly be like, all right, you're going to kill 2 of my opponents, and on my turn, have I got the capacity to kill you before I lose Platinum Angel? Have a think.
Yeah.
Do you actually want to counterspell this? Because you countering that could basically be like, all right, I'm giving 2 people an opportunity to win.
I think this is a really good exercise in knowing not only what your outs are, but also what your responses look like. Because you might have the capacity to deal with something at a later date. And as a sort of general rule of playing at instant speed, deal with things the absolute latest that you can, because it gives you the maximum amount of information that you possibly can. So yeah, let's say you have a counterspell for that Storm King's Thunder, but you also have... what killed me the other day? I think there's a card called Wild Ricochet. It's a 5-mana instant. It copies a spell on the stack, and you choose new targets for the copy, and you also choose new targets for the original spell.
Yeah.
I have, at one point, cast a massive burn spell, and someone just Wild Ricocheted and killed me instead.
Deflecting SWAT, but budget.
Yeah, or in a similar vein, deflecting palm.
Yes.
If someone's going to resolve that burn spell, and you're like, yeah, cool, I don't need to counter this. I can kill you.
Yeah. What if you died?
Yeah. Counterpoint, die.
Yeah. I think there's so many examples we could pull out
There
for this as well. Like, like Suture Priest, that's one of your favorite aristocrats effects.
So this gains you a life when your creature's ETB, loses opponent's life when their creature's ETB.
So I've seen this on Walt's board before, going, oh my god, I know that card is going to be nuts. But I'm like, oh, hang on a minute. I'm playing a Spellslinger deck. I have like 3 creatures in this entire deck.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
I don't need to worry about this. Of course, Walt's going to gain a bunch of life, but he's going to drain my other opponents for like 30. I'm good.
Well, this is the thing about ignoring these problem permanents is, if they are to the detriment of other players, you are actually... That is your path to victory, is leaving them. Not only does it let you prioritize what your win looks like and finding the cards you need and casting the spells that you need, you are also actively bringing opponents' life totals down. You might be bringing opponents' resources down. They have to spend cards removing these things.
Yeah.
Like, it's actually in your best interest to let your opponents fight amongst themselves.
Yeah, I actually really like the Napoleon quote that you brought up. Yeah, don't interrupt them if they're killing each other.
Yeah.
Like, you just leave them, let them do it.
Absolutely.
Stand on the hill in the background and be like, okay, I'll come in and claim the trophy when it's all done.
Well, how many Commander games can we think of where the player who wins is the player who is behind for almost the entire game because the other 3 players spend all their time ganging up on each other?
We talked about the Bradbury ice
Stephen
skating.
Bradbury
effect of, if you're unfamiliar, it's an ice skater, an Australian ice skater, speed skater, that was like so not going to win the ice
miles
skating.
Behind.
Like,
he made the final for this particular Olympics, so he was definitely a competitive, but he was comfortably the worst skater on that particular day.
And in the race was performing the worst.
Comfortably behind.
But kept pushing towards and kept seeing his path to victory.
Yeah.
And what happened was all the players at the front of the pack fell down and he won gold. He just skated on past them and claimed victory.
It's worth watching.
What a good metaphor.
It's a good metaphor. It's worth watching that video just to see the expression on his face, the pure joy at the fact that he won gold.
Looks like me after Walt plays Suture Priest. But I think when we're thinking about, like, because we've talked about politics and how we can kind of like align deals and stuff like that, in the same vein of thinking about players, ignoring these problematic permanents and putting your focus on a player might be more important instead. one of my greatest expressions when I play Commander is, oh, well, if I don't have permanent removal, I can go for player removal.
Yeah, this is something we hear a lot in Magic and in Commander in particular, is like, oh, I hate these 5 permanents. Can I just kill you?
Yeah, if instead of casting 5 removal spells, I cast Overwhelming Stampede but push it all towards you, all 5 of those disappear.
All those permanents don't exist when you are no longer in the game. Yeah, it's absolutely a valid thing, and actually it's the last thing that I want to talk about specifically in this Path to Victory is combat. Don't forget the combat step. It is so integral, and I see people making, in my opinion, just slightly suboptimal choices during combat a lot of the time. So, let's just say, a good phrase I think to think about in Magic, and I think this popped up once when I was playing Arena, you know how you get those little like tips, like don't forget this, don't forget this.
Fairy sprite
thing, basically.
When you do the tutorials.
Yeah, so one of these was basically saying, if you aren't planning on blocking with a creature, should you just attack? And it wasn't saying, like, always attack, but it was sort of, like, basically trying to put in your head.
Is it better to attack than hold it up as a potential block that you're not planning on using as a block anyway?
Well, this is the thing. I see a lot of people, like, leaving up probably far too many blocks when a player is open. Like, if you've got an 8/8 and someone's got, like, 3 2/2 blockers, you might want to block with it. And in some cases, it might be right to block if you're on a low life total or whatever. But, like, if you have a free attack on someone, just attack. And also, don't roll a dice to decide who to attack. Make a choice. There will always be someone, even on the early turns of the game, someone might have dropped 3-4 mana rocks at this point, while someone else is on 2 lands.
Yeah.
Attack that player. They are in the lead and they deserve to take 4 or 5 damage.
Yeah, if you've played with me, I have rolled dice before to decide who I attack. And I know, like, I agree with Walt here, that I think if you can see who's in the lead, attack them. I roll dice for a couple of different reasons. One, to depower my own play style if I'm playing with new players, or if there is no clear indication of who's winning,
which does happen in the early turns sometimes.
That's so fine.
Yeah.
Or I'll just attack the player I'm most scared of instead. But
well, it's interesting that in all of these scenarios that you're still attacking.
I'm still making
preemptively leaving blocks back if you don't need them.
Exactly, and I think that this is something that I've learned because I'm a very, like, even though I play Is It, which is a very, like, I need to do it now and I want to win and all this kind of stuff kind of attitude, I'm actually quite reserved in resource using in Magic. I try and hold back a lot of resources for responses and blocks and all this kind of stuff. And very early on, one of my, like, MTG senseis at the time was basically like, you could have won if you swung with this creature 3 turns ago and kept swinging. You've got a 10/10 with trample. None of us can block it. You would have dealt, like, 60 damage in the last, like, 5 turns.
Yeah.
Swing your creatures. Like, seriously, you would have won by now.
Sometimes it can seem kind of obvious, but look, we get complicated board states in Commander. We get, like, 1 million creatures and all this kind of stuff. But, yeah, often you have free attacks. Like, 10/10 with Trample is, on most board states, a free attack on someone.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, you can maybe in your brain go, oh, but they've got 10 1/1 chump blockers and they could chump and kill it. Think about the effect for them. That's fucking terrible for them.
Yeah.
They're going to lose 10 of their creatures, which is integral to their game plan.
Yeah.
No, they're probably just going to take 10.
I see this a lot, actually, in particular with flyers, where I think often people have, like, 5-6 damage that's in the air, and someone's got no flying blocks. And something that I've been doing a lot recently is I will just attack.
Yeah.
If it's a free attack, I'll just kind of go, sometimes I'll divide it up a bit, 3 this way, 2 this way. But let me tell you, over the course of a game, and especially when you're trying to get life totals low because you're playing aristocrats or tokens or whatever, it does a lot of work. And over, 4 turns, that's 12 damage.
And I've found that, like, with the flyers thing, think about, like, I encourage you, go onto your Moxfield list and have a look. How many good flying blocks do you have in your decks? And how many good flying attacks? Like, if you have a flyer, it's probably a better attacker than a better blocker.
Yeah, most of the time it's better to attack with a flyer.
100%.
Especially because most of the time someone is completely open. Like, it's not like they've got, like, a decent reach blocker. Yeah. I'm talking, like, a lot of the time people have no flying blocks at all. It just seems like a no-brainer to attack over that time.
Yeah, and I think I referenced it earlier, but, like, on the flip side, when we think about blocking, you think, like, oh, yeah, okay, there's 10/10 with Trample swinging at me, and I've got these 10 1/1 creatures. I could block and kill it, but I need these 1/1s because next turn I have an Overwhelming Stampede effect to deploy, and that's going to get me to my win. So really think, do you actually need to block, or is your win secured if you keep the board state you have? Because sometimes, and we play Commander, our life total is 40, for Christ's sake. It's huge. We can take a 10-10 to the face and be like, yeah, all right, swing at you next turn with a huge board state.
Yeah.
That's much, much better.
Obviously, it's all situational, but I think overall I agree with you. I think people in general are too quick to block. Especially when the block is bad. So basically, when I say a block is bad, generally speaking, a 1-for-1 block is pretty good. Like if you are happy to trade a card for a card. Yeah, especially if, if it's a 10-10 without trample, it's coming at you and you've got a 1-1 death touch blocker.
That's a sick trade.
That's a fantastic trade for you.
A really easy way to kind of identify why these are good trades is look at the mana value of the cards. So for example, a Moss Viper is a 1-mana 1-1 with death touch.
Yeah.
That blocks and kills a Gulter with a 12-12 trample.
Yes.
You still take 11 to the face, but you're trading 12 mana worth of card for 1 mana worth of card.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a really good trade.
Absolutely. I think power toughness matters as well. Like, obviously, in that case, it was pretty obvious, but sometimes something's got a lot of +1 counters on it, and you can kill it with something that's really, really small, and that actually kind of makes the trade even better for you because they've invested counters onto that card.
They've used other cards to make that card better, and if you now remove it, it's like you've removed 3 cards.
Well, and this is kind of the other thing that comes into blockers a lot, is how many actual cards are you trading for how many cards they're attacking you with. So yeah, if Gulter is 1-12-12 with trample, and you trade your 1 Moss Viper, that's a 1-for-1. That's okay if you're happy to make that trade. But if you're trading, like in the circumstance you had said before, it's a 10-10, and you've got 10 1-1s, even if they're tokens, it's still kind of like you're trading 10 cards for 1.
Yes.
That's pretty bad for you in general. Yeah. So
especially if your strategy is going wide.
Yeah.
If your deck is designed to have a lot of 1-1s, 10 1-1s, don't throw them under the bus. You're building them up.
Yeah.
That's your task. That's your path to victory.
That's your path to victory. And this is the thing you got to come back to is like, okay, those 1-1s might be good blocks here in that you can, soak up all that damage. But what are the 1-1s worth to you in your pursuit of victory? And yeah, if you've got an overwhelming stampede in your hand, don't trade 1-1s, my goodness. Take the damage.
Think about what your next turn looks like. Is one of my key things to say here. Is like, if you trade those 10 1-1s, your next turn with that overwhelming stampede in hand now looks way worse.
Yeah.
But if you take 10 to the face and keep your 10 1-1s, your next turn looks like a win. Like, it is way, way better to take the 10 damage.
Yeah, even if you don't have a win on your next turn, let's say, I play a lot of go-wide decks. If I have a card like Shamanic Revelation in my hand...
Oh, you're keeping those 1-1s
I'm keeping those 1-1s, absolutely. This is a 5-mana sorcerer that draws a card for each creature I control. That might be the difference between drawing 12 cards and drawing 2 cards for 5 mana. I would 100% rather have 10 extra cards than soak up 10 damage.
And especially in a situation where you've got that and another card in hand, you're like, I need to refill my hand. Your path to victory is going to be a lot clearer with more cards in your hand than a higher life total.
Yeah, I think the general rule that I would give here, and this is something that I do a lot and I've found a lot of success with, really rarely chump block. Chump block, for those who don't know, is when you sort of throw a 1-1 in front of a big creature or something like that, or just like throw a creature away for on a bad block.
Chump implying that he's disposable as a
you're just throwing it away kind of thing. It's obviously situational. If someone's got a 12-12 that doesn't have trample and you've got a 1-1, like, that's great. You just gain 12 life. Do that trade. But I see a lot of people throwing away blocks that, like, they don't get almost anything out of except for a bit of life. And yeah, personally, I'm so inclined to take sometimes like 14 damage in one hit because I know that I need all those creatures on my next turn. And I found it really effective, basically.
I think, you've looked at it in the path kind of line. To put it down at the very end, you're looking at it as your path to victory as this. Your victory at the end, if you win the game, is the same victory if you are on 1 life compared to 40 life.
Yeah.
If you win a game of Commander on 1 life, you won a game of Commander. If you win a game of Commander on 60 life, you won a game of Commander. It doesn't change anything.
The wins are all worth the same amount, absolutely.
A dub's a dub.
Dub's a dub. Well, the path to victory is treacherous, but it can be navigated if you have the right tools at your disposal. You'll need to truly know your decks and what they want to do, and understand the way in which these goals fit into the decks you are playing against. There will be many distractions in the form of problem permanents, scary board states, and political deals, but it is crucial that you understand what stands between you and your victory. Learning these skills is perhaps the most important focus in improving as a Magic player. Space Commanders, command received!
Nice. Still going with the salute.
Yeah, still going with the salute.
I feel like they're going to be less inclined to like abduct us in really horrific ways if we appease them, you know, like keep them happy.
I think we're doing good. I mean, we had a second one the other day who was giving us some commands. So I reckon overall they're pleased with us if they're giving us more feedback.
We're nearly 30 episodes into this now. We've done a lot for these Space Commanders.
We have. I hope we get something in return someday soon.
I hope so. Well, if you want to give us something in return, you can answer these next questions. Listeners, do you feel commanded? How good do you think you are at finding your way to a win? We want to hear stories where you've made a big risk, like maybe taken 10 to the face, and it's paid off with a win. So you can get in touch with us in many different ways. You can send us an email, you can add us on Twitter, or the best way, in my opinion, to chat with us is on our Discord server, which is linked in the show notes. You'll be able to jump on, have a chat with all of the other listeners of the Get Commander podcast, chat with Walt and I, and even possibly find a game with us.
Yeah.
Speaking of finding a game with us, you can actually get a guaranteed game with us if you'd like by joining our Patreon.
Yeah, so for the one of our tiers, we will play with you every month over Spell Table. Wherever you are, whatever time, we will make a time that works for you.
And if you're international, we're not afraid of setting our alarm for like 3 a.m.
No,
we'll do that.
We'll do it. We'll definitely do it. And speaking of Patreon, we would like to personally thank Fletcher Cutting for supporting us in the Space Commander tier. You're the best, Fletcher.
Yeah, you are absolutely gold. And if you want to support us in other ways and you don't have the money to splash out on us on Patreon, you can always leave us a review on the podcasting app that you're using, except Google for some reason, and tell your friends about us. We want to spread the Get Commanded message as far as wide as we can.
Absolutely we do. We'd like to thank again Palms Off Gaming for sponsoring our podcast. They create fantastic deck boxes, sleeves, binders, and other gaming accessories. You can check them out at palmsoffgaming.com.au.
Yeah, thanks guys. All right, well, just about an hour for this episode, but
that's pretty good. But we got a little bit of extra time. I'd like to planeswalk out of Magic into somewhere else. I did last week. It's your turn, James. Where are we planeswalking
We're going to planeswalk to university. You excited?
Hey! James works at a university.
Yes.
So
I was trying to get Walt to be like, oh no, not learning again. But you actually love your university experience was great.
I did a full 5 years. A full year longer than I was supposed to. But yes, I enjoyed university a lot.
Well, I also enjoyed my university experience a lot too. And now that I work at a university, I work at the marketing team. And I found that the last couple of years specifically, there's been this weird effect that's happened. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but this like COVID-19 thing.
Oh.
It
rings a bell.
It might have been on the news once or twice.
Yeah.
But it basically meant that everyone had to learn from home, which was really...
I have... become intimately familiar with this.
Yes. Everyone knows what it did. For unis specifically, we all had to work from home.
Yep.
We weren't on campus. And something beautiful has just happened recently that I wanted to share.
Sure.
University in Australia has just started up again for semester 1.
Mm-hmm.
And we had, for the first time in like 3-4 years, a full-blown orientation week. Like
O week.
O week, which is if you're a first year or second year, it is your favorite week. If you're a fourth or fifth year, you wait and don't go.
Yep.
University's too
wait
crowded.
A week before you go in.
But O week, for those that don't know, is like, it's called orientation week. So the whole point of it is to kind of get your grips with campus, understand where your classes are, maybe meet some of your fellow students, fellow academics.
Yep.
And this year's O week was like it was when I was a student, like when we studied.
Oh.
So, do you remember when going on campus and they'd have all the tables set up of all the different student clubs you could join?
Absolutely. My journey with my student theatre at university began on O Week. I was like, okay, I'm finding the student theatre. I want to join. I want to be in theatre shows. And I literally signed up on that day. So, O Week has a very special place in my heart, because then in subsequent years when I was part of that organisation, I would go and I would
you'd represent. You'd be like, like, join the student theatre, guys. It's great.
Exactly right.
I absolutely love it so much. Like, for me, my university experience, my O-Week club to join was the snow sports team.
Right.
I stumbled upon, and it's hilarious. In Australia, our orientation week is in March, February kind of time.
Height of summer.
It is boiling hot.
Yes.
Really hot.
Arguably the hottest time of the year, basically. End of Feb, early March. Yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculously hot. So when I saw someone dressed in full snow gear, strapped into a snowboard, promoting the snow sports team, I was like, you guys are where I should be. I need to hang out with you.
Yeah.
It's been really beautiful. And honestly, like, I was working in my office on campus during O-Week.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to go down to campus to check it all out. They went all out this year. There was free food. Like, by free food, I mean, like, full, like, meals for free. Just ice cream. There was pancakes. There was, like, these really nice skewers and lamb kebabs. There was these corn fritters that were really lovely. They actually had a Ferris wheel on campus on one of the days. And dodgem cars. Actually, it was like a full fairground. It was incredible.
That's amazing. That I'm so glad to know that O-Weeks continue to be like that.
Yeah.
Or I was starting to get back to it. I mean, speaking of free food, I remember one of my O-Weeks, there was someone with the largest wok I've ever seen in my entire life.
Like, literally, like, 30 centimeters is at the base of it, and the top of it is like a meter wide.
Yes, exactly right. Making fried rice. And that was free.
Yeah.
I vividly remember having that fried rice. It was delicious. Yeah, that's really, really cool to know that, like, we're starting to get back to normality. We may never get back to exactly how it used to be, but the fact that it's getting close, that's really lovely.
But it made me feel like it was my university again, the one that I attended, and like I can see the faces on the students. They're excited to be there.
Yeah,
it means so much more than being like, I'm going to go to my orientation class on Zoom.
Yeah.
It's so much, it's so much
it's
better.
Not the same, yeah.
And I just think my planeswalk is to university and to O-Week, but in general, it's about how far we've come, and specifically Victoria, I think.
Yeah.
Shout out to the Victorians for the past couple of years. We've been through it rough.
Yeah.
We've put in the hard work, but now we have our city back and our life back. It's awesome.
Yep.
I'm loving it.
It really is. All right, that's just about all we have for you here. So we'll catch you next week for more Get Commanded fun.
See you later, Commander players.
Bye.